The wind kicked up dust along the main street of Sable Creek as Ellie June stood rigid on the creaking porch of her late daddy's store, watching a lone rider come in slow from the ridge. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. His long duster flapped behind him like a ghost, and the way his eyes swept the town said he was no stranger to trouble and no fool to its scent. 3 days since they buried her father, and already the law had shifted like a snake in the grass. The town went still when Ellie stepped off the porch and strode straight through the muck toward the stranger dismounting near the saloon. Gas lamps flickered behind dirty windows. Boots stopped mid-step. Cards froze mid-deal, She called, voice sharp enough to slice through the hush, her finger pointing dead at him. "You're sleeping with me tonight." A chorus of gasps rippled through the street. The cowboy's hand twitched toward his sidearm, then paused, measuring her. She wasn't tall, but she stood like she'd just dared a storm to strike her twice. "Well now, ma'am," he drawled. Southern lilt curling like tobacco smoke. "I reckon we ain't been properly introduced." Ellie stepped in closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear it. "I need a husband before sundown, or I lose everything my daddy left me," she whispered. "I'll pay you good. Just sign the papers. Spend the night where folks can see and ride off clean in the morning." He studied her like a gambler studies a deck, half expecting a trick, half admiring the nerve. Her calloused hands didn't match her dress, and fear trembled behind her jaw clenched hard. Jack Boone had seen his share of traps, but never one set by a woman standing in broad daylight with her back to the wall and hell on her heels. "What's your name?" he asked, low, still one boot between him and the horse. Around them, whispers stirred, some amused, others angry. One of those angry eyes belonged to a slick bastard in a tailored coat, stepping out from the only brick building in town, 2 thick-necked men behind him, flashing deputy stars like vipers showing fangs. Virgil Cain adjusted his gold-rimmed spectacles, smirking. "Miss June," he said with syrup-thick condescension, "this display is hardly appropriate for someone of your standing. Perhaps Dr. Craven should check you for feminine delusions." Ellie's spine snapped straight as a fence post, her voice cool as creekstone. "My mind's just fine, Mr. Cain. Not like those twisted statutes you're tossing around all of a sudden." A flour-dusted man in an apron stepped forward from the crowd, Buck Hanley, the grocer. "The law does say a woman can't hold mineral rights unless she's married," he muttered, regret in his eyes. "Real convenient timing, I'll admit." Jack kept quiet, but his glance toward Cain wasn't friendly. The man's eyes flickered. Calculating. Then someone else pushed through the crowd, a tall, straight-backed woman holding a leather book like a weapon. "Clara May, the school marm, actually Mr. Cain," she said sharply. "I've reviewed the updated statute. It says Miss June must be married before claims can be challenged. It says nothing about the length or nature of said marriage." Virgil Cain's face soured as he nodded toward the town's clock tower. "5 hours to sundown, Miss June," he said smugly. "Plenty of time, if you can find someone desperate enough." Ellie's hand closed around Jack's sleeve, gripping tight. "I already have," she said. The tremble in her voice betrayed how much courage it cost to bluff before the whole town. Jack felt a dozen sets of eyes burning into him. He'd meant to pass through Sable Creek like wind over dry grass, not get roped into whatever backwater politics were playing out here. But the fire in Ellie's eyes wasn't fake. 200 and a horse, she whispered, as Cain's boots clicked closer. "Sign the paper, share one roof tonight for show, and you ride out tomorrow, no strings." Jack glanced toward the ridgeline beyond the town freedom waiting. His stomach reminded him of the dwindling rations in his saddlebags. 300, he replied quietly. 2 weeks' worth of supplies and the truth about what's really going on. Without a word, Ellie led him toward a small cabin on the edge of town. Sable Creek watched every step. The place sat beneath the shadow of pine-draped hills. A narrow creek whispered beside it, flecked with silver as the sun dipped low. Ellie unlocked the door, revealing a home split between living space and what looked like a healer's nook, dried herbs hanging from Beams bottles labeled in tidy hand on every shelf. Jack removed his hat, silver streaks showing in his dark hair. His eyes scanned the room, no wasted movement. "You're a healer," he muttered, gesturing toward the mortar and pestle, the neat stacks of notes. Ellie didn't look at him as she lit the stove. "My mama taught me." Then Red Elk finished the job. "He knows every root and leaf in these mountains. That explains the way folks muttered when you walked up to me," Jack said, eyes still scanning the space. Ellie didn't look at him, her hands busy with the kettle as she poked at the fire. "My mama taught me all she knew," she murmured, voice tight. Then Red Elk took over. "That man can name every healing root in these hills and how to use 'em." She disappeared into the corner, lifting a floorboard beneath her bed and pulling out a worn leather pouch that clinked with the sound of hard coin. She laid it square on the rough table between them. $300, she said flatly, "like you asked. Soon as the paper's signed." An hour later, the justice of the peace showed up, a jittery fellow whose eyes jumped between the mismatched pair, like he was half expecting someone to pull a gun before the ink dried. Most irregular, he kept muttering under his breath, though his pen scratched fast and steady. By the time the sun dipped behind the pines, Ellie June was legally bound to Jack Boone. And Virgil Cain's men slunk away from the land office, empty-handed, their claim foiled. Meanwhile, the town buzzed with gossip about the woman who'd bought herself a husband before sundown and dared the whole damn town to say otherwise. "That's your room," Ellie said briskly after the justice left, pointing to a narrow side chamber with a single cot. "I'll stay in the main room. But folks'll need to think we're sharing a roof proper." Jack leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, studying her. "You still haven't told me what Cain wants so bad he's willing to rewrite the law for it." Ellie hesitated, then crossed to the hearth and knelt beside it. Her fingers pried loose a warped board. From underneath, she drew out a small oilskin bundle, unfolding it on the table. Inside, a hand-drawn map and rock samples that sparkled even in firelight. "My daddy found something deeper than the silver on the surface," she said, voice low. "A pure vein. Runs beneath our land, maybe under half the valley." Jack gave a low whistle, turning one of the samples in his calloused hand. "And Cain caught wind of it before your father could lock in the rights," he muttered. 3 sharp knocks cut through the cabin. A woman's urgent voice followed in a whisper. Ellie snatched up the bundle and shoved it back beneath the floorboard. She swung open the door to find Clara May, breathless and dusty, her neat hair in disarray, a leather-bound book clutched to her chest. "They're coming," the schoolteacher warned. "Cain's men. They're not bringing wedding gifts." The sound of hooves thundered closer. Ellie moved fast, grabbing herbs and tools with practiced hands. Jack checked his pistol with calm precision. "There's a root cellar out back behind the woodpile," she told him, tossing a lantern his way. Clara May helped gather the bottles and satchels while the hoofbeats grew louder. "Eli Craven is with them," she said, grimly peeking through the curtain. "He's got that black doctor's bag he uses for official matters." They barely made it to the hidden entrance before the riders surrounded the cabin. Torches cast long shadows across the walls, dancing in the gathering dark. Virgil Cain's voice rang out, too smooth to be trusted. "Just checking on the bride's well-being," he called. Below ground, the 3 huddled in silence, listening to boots stomp overhead. "They won't break anything." Yet Clara whispered, though even she sounded uncertain. The root cellar led into a narrow tunnel dug long ago by Ellie's father, an escape route no one else knew about. "It runs out to an old mine shaft half a mile east," Ellie whispered, lighting the path. They crawled through the tunnel, then emerged beneath a sky littered with stars. Off in the distance, a fiery glow rose against the black. Ellie turned stiff as steel, watching her childhood cabin go up in flames. They torched it, she said. Not shock, just bitter confirmation. So much for keeping up appearances. She turned toward the woods. We have to reach the other cellar, she said, already moving. He has proof. The water's poisoned Cain's refineries to blame. The trail climbed sharp and rocky, too narrow for horses. They'd bought themselves time. Clara May struggled in her town shoes, slipping on loose stone. Jack moved with quiet skill, pausing often to listen and throw off any tracks behind them. You've done this before, Ellie said during a short break. Union Scout, he replied. Spent the war sneaking through Confederate lines. By dawn, they reached a clearing where an old cabin waited half-swallowed by ancient pines. Smoke curled from its chimney. A tall man stood in the doorway, skin like worn copper and black hair streaked silver. Rifle slung across his chest, but relaxed. Ellie June brings storm clouds to my door, Red Elk said calmly, eyes scanning the newcomers, and a husband who moves like a mountain cat. As Ellie tended to her blistered feet, Clara filled Red Elk in on what had happened. He nodded without surprise, then bent down to lift a loose board from his own floor, pulling free a worn leather journal. 17 cases, he said, flipping pages. All from drinking creek water downstream of Cain's refinery. 3 dead. 2 of them kids. Eli Craven called it consumption. At daybreak, sunlight filtered through the pines just as shouts rang out beyond Red Elk's cabin. A crew of grimy miners burst from the tree line, hauling a limp man on a rough stretcher. His leg was twisted unnaturally beneath pants soaked with blood. Collapse at the north shaft. One of them panted, face streaked with dirt and dread. We pulled him out just in time. Eli Craven wouldn't come another spat. Said he had more important business with Virgil Cain. Without missing a beat, Ellie June cleared the table. Put him here, she ordered. Her gaze snapped to the man's injury, already swollen flesh torn where bone had split through. Her hands moved quick and steady. Willow bark for pain, yarrow to stop the bleeding. Now. Clara May sprang into action, sorting through bottles under Red Elk's shelves. Her hands shook at the sight of so much blood, but she didn't falter. In the corner, Jack Boone watched silently. Watched the woman who once begged him to marry her for survival, now command the room like a seasoned field medic. Ellie worked like she was born to it, slicing the pant leg, cleaning the wound, setting the bone with practiced hands. Red Elk moved in sync beside her grinding herbs without needing a word. The two worked as if they'd done this dance 100 times before, no need for language when lives were at stake. This has to be aligned right, Ellie told the miner who'd come to. You won't like the next part, but I've done this before. She pressed a leather strap into his mouth. Then came the sickening crack of bone being reset. The man passed out cold. Ellie's hands trembled as she wrapped the leg, but she didn't stop. Blood stained her sleeves, but her focus never wavered. He'll need weeks of care, she said, rinsing off in a basin of hot water. Infection's the enemy now, not the break. Word traveled fast through the hills. By noon, more miners had come, 3, then 5, some coughing, some limping, others pale from bad water and worse treatment. That man Craven only keeps control 'cause he's the only doctor allowed, Clara May muttered while prepping tinctures. But everyone you heal chips away at that control. Jack had planted himself near the door, leaning casual hand, never far from his sidearm. His eyes tracked each visitor, marking who came in goodwill and who came nosin' for Virgil Cain. From the ridge above, he spotted one of Cain's men watching through a scope, tallying names of those defying the unspoken order to shun Ellie June. "We've kicked the damn hornet's nest," Jack muttered that night, wiping sweat from his brow. Cain won't let this ride, not if it risks his grip on the town or Craven. By the third day, they'd settled into a rhythm. Ellie and Red Elk treating a steady stream of patients. Clara logging symptoms, names, and doses with schoolteacher precision. Jack kept guard ears open for whispers and boots on the wind. Then came more trouble. A miner, gray-bearded and coughing hard, showed up with his daughter. "Supply wagons ain't making it through," he said, voice hoarse. "Cain's claiming some health inspection from the governor. Blocking everything." Shortly after sundown, Buck Hanley arrived with his wagon. His flour sacks looked ordinary until he peeled them back to reveal crates of food tools and bundles of wrapped goods. "Can't cross Cain openly," he said, tossing one nervous glance at the woods. "But folks are starting to question what he's selling." From a hollowed-out tin of sourdough starter, Buck pulled out a slim red-bound ledger, hands shaking. "Wife cleans his office," he said quietly, handing it to Ellie. Inside was Poison Virgil Cain's personal records. Bribes, freight cons, rigged mining claims, all of it tracked in ink. Ellie flipped pages, her mouth tightening. "My father wasn't his first," she murmured. "And sure as hell not the last." Clara gasped, pointing to a section. "He's been poisoning the water on purpose," she said, "to drive families off so he can snatch their land." The next morning, Whispering Rose arrived under the guise of delivering laundry, but the look in her eyes said this was no house call. "Craven's ordered specialty chemicals from Denver," she said, setting down a basket that smelled faintly of lye and mountain air. "Cain's men are watching every road out." Her voice dropped. "Our girls in the Sisterhood Circle have been running messages, baking them into loaves, stitching them into linens. The Homestead Alliance is moving." Jack crossed his arms. "He'll close the town before he lets you get that ledger out." "There's more," Whispering Rose added, glancing over her shoulder. "A federal judge is riding the circuit, due in Broken Mesa next week. He's scheduled to hold court right here for 2 full days. Ellie exchanged a look with Clara. "A real court," Clara said slowly. "With real law." Jack nodded. "And real marshals." Ellie June and Clara May locked eyes, the same firelighting behind both pairs. No words needed, it was clear, as a thundercloud ready to break. If we get this proof into the hands of a federal judge, Clara started her mind already calculating legal strategies. "He'll ride with his own marshals," Jack Boone cut in his voice, low but steady. "Men who ain't bought or bullied by Virgil Cain." That night, under the dim flicker of a kerosene lamp, Ellie and Jack huddled over documents. What had started as a hasty marriage was fast becoming something else, something built on common purpose and grit. My daddy died, thinking he failed to protect what we had. Ellie said, her voice soft but sure, as she laid out a hand-drawn map and old land deeds. "But turns out he left everything we need to bury Cain's empire." Jack paused, hand resting near hers. "You're honoring him, Ellie. Not by running, by standing your ground." Before she could answer, the sound of hooves broke through the silence riders moving fast. Not the drunken clatter of Cain's thugs, but the tight rhythm of urgency. Jack snuffed the lamp, and Red Elk rushed to stash their evidence under the hearthstones. When they opened the door, it wasn't a threat. It was a group of exhausted miners carrying something wrapped in a threadbare blanket. A boy, no older than 8. Limp as a sack of flower lips tinged a sickly blue. "We found him down by the creek," one of the men rasped. "Ain't waking up." Ellie knelt beside the boy, eyes already scanning the signs. Shallow breath, discolored lips, no fever. Her stomach turned. "Mercury," she muttered, "from Cain's refinery runoff." As she sprang into action, Red Elk gathered milk thistle dandelion and other bitter herbs. Ellie ground activated charcoal, working with speed born of experience. The boy's skin was cold to the touch. "His daddy works Cain's main claim," one miner whispered, too scared to speak out. But if this boy dies, the rest didn't need saying. Jack's jaw tightened. All through the night, Ellie and Red Elk worked by firelight. They forced purges, bathed his limbs, whispered prayers to anything listening. When dawn broke, the boy was still breathing, and the blue had faded from his lips. Jack stayed up with them, eyes fixed on the woods, pistol close. Word had already started to spread. Men in the mining camps began looking at their own children and wondering how long silence could buy safety. By midday, Doc Tiller arrived. He carried a worn leather case filled with glass vials and chemical compounds. His face was pale, like a man carrying too much guilt for too long. "I brought the antidotes," he said, hoarsely. "From what I salvaged before, Cain shut me out." He knelt beside the boy and worked in silence, precise and clean. "I was the one who mixed the chemicals Cain ordered dumped in the water," Doc confessed. "It wasn't an accident. It was strategy. I can testify to that." As word of the confession and the boy's recovery traveled, miners began surrounding Red Elk's cabin, not in fear, but to protect it. They came with picks, hammers, even sticks of blasting powder. No sheriff's badge needed when justice burns hot enough. At sunset, Eli Craven arrived in his buggy, dressed too clean for the mountains. He stepped down with false calm. "I'm here to take the boy to a proper medical facility," he announced loudly, as if trying to reclaim control. But a wall of men blocked his path. 3 kids already buried in those facilities growled Wade Fletcher the miner Ellie had patched up after the shaft collapse. "Mrs. Harlan saved my leg. You wouldn't even leave your chair." Craven's mask cracked. He pulled out a folded document. "She's not licensed. She's using superstition and homemade remedies. This is illegal, dangerous." Ellie stepped forward, hands still stained with crushed herbs. "My mama was a midwife in Boston," she said evenly. "I assisted battlefield surgeons when bullets outnumbered doctors, and I've read anatomy texts that your tin diploma wouldn't understand." Each word hit like a bullet. Craven flinched, then scowled. "Cain won't tolerate this insurrection," he warned. "Territorial marshals have been summoned. They'll shut this down and arrest every last one of you." He turned and rode off into the dusk, the threat hanging like smoke in the air. By morning, everyone in Sable Creek knew what happened. Some clung tighter to Cain's side, but many too many had seen the truth with their own eyes. Clara May's schoolhouse became their war room. "The federal judge gets here tomorrow," she told the growing crowd of allies, pointing to a hand-drawn timeline chalked across the blackboard. "We need affidavits, every soul who's seen the poisoning, the lies, the theft. We build the case airtight." Meanwhile, Whispering Rose activated the Sisterhood Circle. Maids and cooks moved quietly through the town, collecting testimony, scribbled notes, anything that proved Cain's crimes. Hidden in laundry baskets and tucked into pie tins were names, dates, ledgers. Truth smuggled beneath the noses of the very men they cleaned for. Buck Hanley, shaking but resolute, returned with freight records showing how Cain gouged small businesses to bankruptcy, then bought their land for pennies. "We got one shot at this," Clara said, voice sharp with purpose. "We either bring him down, or he buries us all." Buck Hanley's ledger told the story in numbers, bribes, freight fraud, and rigged claims, all leading straight back to Virgil Cain. It was a paper trail soaked in greed, and it damned the man clear as daylight. Meanwhile, Ellie June and Red Elk prepared medicine bundles for the mining families, the ones brave enough to stand with them. Every pouch held treatments for fever infection and poison, especially poison. Jack Boone watched the preparations with quiet respect. He'd come here for coin, but now he found himself drawn into something that looked an awful lot like the battles he'd fought after the war, only this time the fight was for something raw, honest, and worth staying for. That night, inside Clara May's schoolhouse-turned headquarters, Jack and Ellie stood over a crude, hand-drawn map of Sable Creek candlelight flickering across its smudged lines. "Our marriage started as a deal," Ellie said, "but I think we make a damn good team." Jack traced a finger along the town's outskirts. "Cain'll go after the easy targets first," he muttered. "The families on the fringe, the ones with no neighbors close enough to help. We need to pull folks in, tighten the circle." A sudden knock made everyone freeze. Then came Red Elk's familiar rhythm. Jack opened the door. "They came early," Red Elk said, stepping inside, voice low. "Territorial marshals, 4 of 'em. But they ain't actin' right." He went on. "No courthouse posting, no public writs. They went straight to Cain's office, then scattered into the camps." Clara's face darkened. She reached into her desk and pulled out a hidden drawer, stuffing it full of key papers. "We've got to move faster," she said, already scribbling a message to the federal judge's advance party. "We can't wait for protocol." As night settled, Ellie and Jack found themselves alone for the first time in days. The room was quiet, but charged. Their marriage had been all paper and purpose, but something more had taken root in the shadows between duty and firelight. "When this is over," Ellie began twisting the simple band on her finger. "We can dissolve it if you want to go." Jack's rough hand covered hers. "Some arrangements turn into something else," he said. His usual hard lines softened in the glow of the lamp. "I ain't looking to leave." Dawn rolled in on Sable Creek like the breath before a gunshot. The mines were still, the streets too quiet. Territorial marshals had set up shop at the edge of town, stopping everyone who passed, eyes sharp for names on Cain's blacklist. Inside the schoolhouse, Ellie laid out her healing supplies across school desks, turning them into makeshift treatment stations. Across the room, the little boy who'd once been near death was now sitting up, color back in his cheeks. His father, once silent, now stood guard like a lion. Doc Tiller worked feverishly in the back room, bottles and samples laid out on a teacher's desk. His voice was low and urgent. "Mercury, arsenic, lead," he said, "all climbing after Cain's refinery runoff. I've got the proof." In the main room, Clara May had transformed. The school teacher was now a full-blooded legal general, glasses slipping as she stacked affidavits by category. She pointed to a case precedent. "Marshal Jed Rourke is known for being fair. He ruled against the mines in Silverton even after they offered him a fortune." Just before noon, the first flashpoint hit. The fake marshals came to search the schoolhouse. No warrants, no signatures. Jack blocked the door with a relaxed posture that didn't match the fire in his eyes. "You'll need a judge-signed writ to come through that door," he said coolly. Behind him, Clara fed him the legal line word for word. "Or you can wait and explain yourself to Marshal Rourke when he arrives." The tension snapped when women from the Homestead Alliance arrived. Wives, cooks, grannies carrying baskets, loaves of bread, and babies on their hips. But they weren't just bystanders. They were a wall of eyes and witnesses. The marshals backed off. But the message was clear. Cain had made his move. Not long after, a lookout rode in with dust still clinging to his boots. "Federal party's nearin' from the east, and they ain't riding alone, they've got federal marshals with them." Cain moved fast. He sent Eli Craven riding hard to intercept the judge, probably with orders to shape the narrative before the truth could reach his ears. But Jack and Red Elk were faster. They took a back trail one only mountain men and scouts would know, winding sharp and high above the main road. They reached the party, breathless, dust-covered, but burning with urgency. Federal marshals bristled hands near their pistols, but Jack kept his tone formal, steady. "I represent Ellie June Harlan, rightful heir to the Northern mining rights," he said, offering over the marriage certificate and deed papers. The gray-haired man at the head of the group took the documents without flinching. Marshal Jed Rourke. He introduced voice as flat as the plains. "Let's see what kind of mess we're riding into. We request immediate judicial review on grounds of public endangerment," Clara May declared, handing over a thick folder of evidence. Marshal Jed Rourke scanned the contents with the steady focus of a man who'd seen too many lies to be surprised anymore. Then he looked to his escorts. "Set us up at the hotel. No private homes," he ordered, clearly aware of the kind of games folks like Virgil Cain liked to play behind closed doors. "We convene court in 1 hour. Town hall." Word flew fast through Sable Creek, a real federal judge here in the flesh. Curious folks and nervous players drifted toward the weather-worn building, its battered windows now witness to something far more serious than council meetings. Cain strutted in with Eli Craven at his side, and those 4 so-called territorial marshals behind him, wearing tin stars but moving like muscle for hire. From the opposite entrance, Ellie June stepped through, flanked by Jack Boone and Clara May, with Red Elk Doc Tiller and a half-dozen townsfolk forming a quiet wall behind them. The boy who'd nearly died, and his father stood front and center, a living accusation. Marshal Rourke wasted no time. Within minutes, the town hall had transformed into a federal courtroom. His deputies stood firm at the doors while he arranged himself behind a makeshift bench. "This is a legal session of the Territorial Circuit Court," he declared, voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. "We are here to examine evidence of fraud, intimidation, and the willful endangerment of public health in the Sable Creek mining region." Cain's attorney stood first, slick and smug, painting Ellie June as a petty heiress who'd faked a marriage to cheat territorial claims. "She practices unauthorized medicine," the man argued, spreading fear and falsehoods about approved industrial techniques. Eli Craven backed it up with pomp and puffed up credentials, dismissing Ellie's methods as folk superstition. But the act cracked when Marshal Rourke pulled a wire from his coat pocket. "No records from Boston Medical College with your name," he said flatly, eyeing Craven. "Care to explain before continuing your expert opinion?" The room hummed with whispers as Craven stammered, his polished mask slipping fast. That threat had come from Buck Hanley's deep digging, and it was only the start. Then came Ellie June. Quiet, composed. Her voice didn't rise, but the entire room leaned in. She laid out her training, her research, her records. She held up a bound journal mapping illness patterns against Cain's refinery schedule. "We submit 5 water samples from points along Sable Creek," she said, as Doc Tiller displayed vials, each one darker than the last. Toxic levels of mercury and arsenic spike below Cain's operation. The poisoned boy's father gave raw testimony next, voice tight with memory. Then Buck Hanley stepped in, laying out Cain's freight scams and tax shell games with accountant's precision. Then came Whispering Rose's voice, steady as she spoke for the unseen workers, the maids, the cooks, the laundresses. He bragged about poisoning creeks to drive out small claim holders, she said. I heard it myself. So did 3 other girls. By now, Cain's cool swagger had melted into furious twitching. His lawyer's objections flew wild and fast, and Marshal Rourke shot everyone down. Then Clara May brought out the territorial inheritance codes and drove in the final nail. The law had changed after silver was found on Carver land. Convenient. Too convenient. And the papers backed it up. Rourke called a recess. The crowd spilled into the streets like a bursting dam. Grudges and divisions, white, Mexican, Chinese, melted for a moment in shared fury. The spell Cain had held over Broken Mesa's people cracked. When court resumed, Rourke's voice had hardened to steel. Based on clear and convincing evidence of corruption, environmental endangerment, and abuse of office, he said, "I order the immediate suspension of all operations run by Virgil Cain. Federal investigation begins today." Gasps. Silence. Then the federal marshal stepped forward. Cain's face flushed purple. "This is madness. I built this damn town." Marshal Rourke didn't flinch. Dr. Eli Craven will be detained pending review of false medical claims and forged documents, he added. The fake marshals, Hank Doyle, Luke Brand, Roy Mason, Clyde Webb, were stripped of badges and questioned on the spot. And Rourke continued, "This court affirms Ellie June Harlan's rightful claim to her father's estate and land, along with the validity of her marriage to Jack Boone, under territorial law." As Cain was led out in shackles, the people of Sable Creek watched in stunned, almost sacred silence, years of fear gone in a heartbeat. Outside the town square swelled. Men from every mine, every ridge poured in brown hands, white hands, calloused and scarred, clasping one another, passing flasks, laughing with disbelief. And in the center, Ellie June stood, surrounded by faces once too afraid to look her way. Now they came forward. Miners' wives, merchants, elders thanking her for the herbs that healed their children. The risks she'd taken, the strength they now understood. That night, Clara May called a town meeting in the schoolhouse. Lamps burned warm in the windows as Marshal Rourke addressed a packed room. Cain's assets will be overseen by the court. Restitution will be assessed. Damages paid. Then Buck Hanley rose from the back. "Let's build a freight co-op," he said. "No more monopolies. Shared profit. Fair rates. One town, one freight line for all of us." And this time no one laughed. They nodded. Cheered. Because now justice finally had a foothold in Broken Mesa. Miners from across the region gathered around makeshift maps and crates, talking late into the evening about forming a co-op for ore processing. No more selling cheap to greedy refineries, no more being at someone else's mercy. Zeller, soft-spoken but sharp, offered his knowledge on safer refining methods, ones that wouldn't poison streams or children. As the night stretched on, and talks of Sable Creek's rebirth continued, Ellie June slipped out to the porch of the old schoolhouse. There, under a sky blanketed in stars, she found Jack Boone waiting in the quiet. "The stars are burnin' a little brighter tonight," he murmured, gazing upward, his usual steel soft gaze now edged with something gentler. "Looks like your plan worked out even better than you thought." Ellie's lips curved into a small smile. "All I wanted was to keep my father's land," she admitted, hands tucked into her shawl. "Turns out what he really left me was a fire in the belly to fight back against wrong." Just then, Marshal Jed Rourke approached, holding out a packet stamped with the territorial seal. "Your marriage certificate. And the land deed," he announced. "Filed, sealed, and now beyond challenge. Whatever brought you two together, strange or not," he added, "the law sees you as one now." Jack's hand slid into hers, a silent vow more binding than paper. What had begun in desperation now stood on something deeper, mutual respect, shared purpose, and the start of something real. As spring settled in Sable Creek, bloomed in more ways than one. The new processing co-op ran openly using methods developed by Doc Tiller that kept streams clean and workers safe. Buck Hanley's freight collective opened fresh supply lines, smashing the chokehold that once kept the town begging. Greed gave way to fair trade. Clara May expanded the school beyond reading and arithmetic. She built evening classes where cultures blended. Chinese miners taught their methods. Mexican families shared farming secrets. Native healers passed on sacred herbal traditions. Marshal Rourke sent word back to Denver. Weeks later, Dr. Elizabeth Winters rode in Young Bright and unafraid to learn. She partnered with Ellie June, blending science with time-tested remedies. Their clinic quickly became a beacon, a frontier miracle. No longer did Whispering Rose need to slip secrets between laundry folds. She led a sisterhood circle, now supporting mothers, sick folks, and women with dreams that stretched past kitchen walls. Zeller's maps and careful testing earned him a new title, Watershed Inspector. This time his ledgers protected water instead of proving it poisoned. Ellie transformed her father's old cabin. The herb beds grew wider, fuller native plants thrived beside European ones. Inside, research lined the shelves. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place of healing. Jack Boone, though, offered a tin star more than once, turned it down every time. Instead, he founded Sable Creek's first citizen patrol. No corruption, no outsiders with backroom deals, just locals protecting locals. Together, Ellie and Jack built something bold, a new mine ventilation system based on his military designs and her knowledge of lung illnesses. The patent brought steady income, no matter if silver prices rose or crashed. Travelers came curious how a town like Sable Creek, once torn apart, now ran like clockwork. They found unity, white, brown, and black hands building side by side. Clara May started recording it all, every detail of their fight, every soul who stood up when it mattered. Her writings became the town's heartbeat. A year passed. On the anniversary of their strange courthouse union, Ellie and Jack threw a real wedding. This time with flowers, music, and the whole town watching. Marshal Rourke returned just to oversee it. When Virgil Cain's trial finally reached verdict in Denver, it came with steep restitution. His blood money flowed back into Sable Creek, funding the very future he tried to ruin. That night in their quiet bedroom, Ellie hung both marriage certificates side by side, framed in silver. Mined from the ground Cain had once tried to steal. Jack stood behind her, arms around her waist. "For something that started with you saying you're sleeping with me tonight," he said with a rare grin. "We sure ended up building a hell of a life." Ellie smiled, her voice soft. "That one choice changed everything, not just for me, but for this whole town." If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.